Yes, a president with such a strong social media presence is a new force in global diplomacy, and it's not always the most diplomatic tone. And our reporting, talking to officials in Washington, as well as diplomats in the Middle East, suggests that Iran isn't that keen on some of the president's sentiments, and it is making it more difficult to resume negotiations and do the very difficult work of brokering some kind of longer-term deal to bring an end to this conflict. The specific problem is probably around the Strait of Hormuz, which is the focus of the whole crisis now. Last weekend, if you remember, the Iranians said that the Strait was open, and the president was very quick to say, well, our blockade stayed in place, and I think that made it difficult for the talks to resume, and that's what's dominated this week, with the president continuing to say that the blockade is in place and to threaten to extreme actions if he doesn't get his way.
What does all this mean for energy markets, though? We've been watching the price of oil creeping up through this week and heading for a weekly gain for the first time since the war started.
That's right. I think that going back to last Friday, Stephen, when the Iranians said the Strait was open, there was a really positive reaction from oil traders who thought that finally there was a likely resolution and that ships might start leaving the Gulf and get back, and the energy market could begin the long process of getting back to normal. And I think this week that optimism has really faded, and we've seen a steady ratcheting up in the oil price. As a result, it's really worth bearing in mind that although the intense military action, the bombing, has stopped, the Strait is probably more closed than it ever has been, and we're not getting the oil and the fuel that we need out of the Persian Gulf, and it is increasingly going to strain energy markets and have an impact on consumers around the world.
How much pressure is Iran really under then from the US blockade? I mean, the whole point of these barrage of social media posts is to pressure Iran. That would be the US argument, surely.
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting and important question. It does seem to be having an impact on Iran's ability to export oil, but it had been exporting oil throughout the war and exporting oil at very healthy prices. So it's probably got a little bit of a financial buffer. I think the really interesting question for people in energy markets and who are watching to see what happens is, at what point, if Iran can't export, it has to shut down its oil fields because it doesn't have the room to put the oil. That's what we've seen in countries like Kuwait and Iraq during this crisis, exactly the same thing. And there is some view among oil people that because Iranian oil fields are quite old, that when you shut them down, that's a big problem to the long-term prospects of those fields, and the Iranians will want to avoid it. That's one view. The other view is that the Iranians are very resilient, that they are no strangers to conflict. There are times that oil production has been suppressed there in the past, and they've come through it. So, divided views.